Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to the Wednesday night webinar brought to you by NOCD. NOCD, a free downloadable app that you can get on the iOS or Google Play, and the NOCD platform is available for you with therapy tools, online support through our community, and we have a teletherapy service, and we continue to get more and more insurance companies on board to be able to be the supplier of your means to utilize that teletherapy, which is so exciting. And we continue to grow in more and more states and hire more therapists as well too. So to reach out to our care team for a free 15-minute chat, go up in the corner over there. Now it's funny, Chrissy, it used to be over there, and see on my screen it's over there. So I had to go like through your head and do it. But then Kaylee finally told me,
in my hair.
And it would totally, and I'd just be snarled all night in your hair trying to unravel myself. But it's actually over there, even though on my screen it's over there. So I have to get used to doing this now instead. So that's always fun. Chrissie Hodges, hey, welcome.
Hey,
how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you so much for having me here. Always a pleasure. I just love you and NOCD and all that you do.
Well, let's talk about, first of all, a little bit of the work that you do with Gamechangers and peer support and everything. Tell us a little bit about all of those fun and exciting things that you've got going on.
I will. Thank you. And thank you for giving me a platform to be able to talk about this. So I am someone that lives with OCD. Why don't
you just kick OCD out then if you live with it? Why don't you just tell it to go away? No.
Oh, I do.
Oh, okay. Good. I didn't know if anyone ever tried that or not. I'd throw it out as an option, maybe just to see if that worked. Okay. All right. Yeah.
And I have learned that if you just open the door for OCD, it's a lot better than having OCD like bust the door down and come in.
Well, there,
right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, so OCD showed up for me when I was 8, and I lived with it for 12 years, dealing with some of the sexual intrusive thoughts, violent intrusive thoughts, some of your more, the thoughts that you don't even associate that there's something wrong. And so I really had overarching scrupulosity. So I thought that was the only explanation I could come up with was these thoughts were punishment from God. I grew up in the South, so the culture was very religious. My family's super religious. And so it was kind of the only explanation I had. But also that was the reason why I stayed quiet. I didn't want to tell anybody this was going on. I couldn't reconcile it in my head. And so I lived with this in secret for 12 years. I had themes ranging from the fear of vomit, Patrick.
We got to share that story later.
We will share the story.
Because that is, to this day, a favorite. It's like a top 10 favorite story of mine to tell, actually. So, yeah, I love that story.
So it started with the fear of vomit. That was my first one. And then scrupulosity showed up. I had fears of violence. I had fears of demon possession, fears of harming kids. And then I had fears of not knowing what my sexuality was. And that was probably the one that hit me the hardest when I was 14. Again, having kind of this overarching scrupulosity of why am I having these thoughts? What does this mean? What did I do to deserve this? Not wanting to tell anyone at all what was going on. And so I went in and out, I guess, with periods of depression, even though I couldn't put a name on it, Patrick, because when you don't know that you're experiencing depression, you're just trying to figure out what's really going on or trying to deal with whatever mood is what it is. And so I used to think to myself, if I would get into these cycles, because people say all the time that OCD ebbs and flows. And that was exactly what it was for me. I would go for months and it would be like in the back of my head. And then it would come to the forefront of my head and completely ruin me for weeks at a time. And I used to think to myself, if it ever gets to a point where it's in the forefront of my head and I can't do anything, then probably suicide is my only option. And it's as stupid as that sounds, it was almost comforting of like, okay, at least there's a way out of this.
Yeah, that's what you think about, right? That's the way out.
Yeah. And so I, survived OCD. That's what I say. Like, I survived it the best that I could until I was 20. And then I had a huge loss in my life, and loss and change and stress is a huge trigger for OCD. And so losing my cousin at a young age, he was one of my best friends, unexpectedly, I spiraled down and experienced such extreme depression and again, just did not know how to reach out. This was back in the 90s. I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't know how to tell someone I was suicidal. I didn't know what to do. And so I attempted suicide and was lucky enough to survive and also get into a psychiatric facility. It was locked and it sucked. But I was lucky that I had a therapist that could really listen, piece together what I was saying, and give me a diagnosis of OCD.
Oh, well, that's great.
Yeah. In 1998, in a psych ward in Atlanta. and it didn't matter the diagnosis. I didn't believe it anyway. I mean, I wanted to believe it, but I didn't. But I did believe in Prozac because that shit was awesome. And made me feel better. And I went back to school like nothing was wrong. Like, yay, no suicide attempt, you're cured. Well, then I went off meds thinking that I could control it, because if you know it's OCD, I mean, why can't you just stop the thoughts? You can just outthink them, right? Are you talking? I can't hear you. Like, I can't hear you. Can you hear me? Oh no. Are you muted? Okay, I'm gonna keep going. Okay, so anyway, I'll just talk and like look for your commentary, because I can always tell on your face anyway. So anyway, so I went in and got my diagnosis and went off medication and decided that I could outthink OCD, and that did not work. And I fell into a depression again. And that's when I decided this is the time that I need to really figure out if there's another treatment modality that would help. I mean, medication was great, don't get me wrong. And I don't like to talk about medication because medication works differently for everybody. But for me, I wanted to find something different. I wanted to find something that I could actually, that was kind of like tangible. So I went online, y'all. This was like late 1990s. This was at AOL.com, and I found OCD Zone, OCDZone.com. I can't remember it, whatever the AOL is, and that was Dr. Stephen Phillipson's website. And I saw the article Thinking the Unthinkable, and it literally saved my life. It was this where I had read all of the stuff about OCD before, about, the typical stuff that you read about OCD, contamination. And, if we think it's bad now, like think back 20 years ago, and how much information wasn't out there. And I finally found people that understood, that finally got what it meant to have like sexual intrusive thoughts or violent intrusive thoughts. And I really felt like this was part of a community. So I wrote to Dr. Phillipson, and I was terrified. And I said, hey, this is who I am, and here's my story, and can you help me? I was in Georgia. He was in New York at the time. And off the cuff, just decided, can this guy help? And he wrote me back the next day. And of course I was like obsessively checking, and then I was like, oh my God, he's gonna write me back and tell me I don't have OCD and none of these symptoms are OCD. And he wrote back and he said, yeah, we'll meet. And so he told me that he would do therapy with me, and he would do it over the phone. And we did therapy for the next, I don't want to say how long, but we did therapy for that long. And ERP was successful, and that was wonderful. So I graduated from ERP, and I will tell you, and I think that this is important to the story, there was a moment after ERP therapy. I remember sitting there when I knew that it worked for me. I remember sitting on this psychology steps, the psychology building steps, and I went, someday I want to tell people about my experience. I want to make people know that they're not alone. Like, this was in 1998. I had no idea
Sure.
how I was going to tell people, but I was like, I'm going to tell people. And then OCD, like clockwork, was like, boom, no, you're not. You're not telling anybody what your intrusive thoughts are, because then the people are going to know you're a fraud, and then they're going to think that you know, all your intrusive thoughts are real. And I, like most of the time with OCD, completely obeyed. So I stayed quiet all through my 20s, lived through kind of what I like to call grieving OCD without support, without therapy, without anything. And I was very alone. I was very scared. I was very isolated. And I finally, in my 30s, owned a clothing store, moved down to Denver again, moving as a trigger, and I relapsed. And when I relapsed, that's when the OCD became real for me. It was, you have this forever. So you can either accept it and let's embrace it, or you can hate yourself for the rest of your life and be very alone with it. And that's when I started speaking out. My first order of business was to go to Toastmasters. And so I totally like bombarded the Toastmasters and talked about OCD. I educated a lot of Toastmasters.
Well, that's okay. I mean, hey, it's something. Sorry, everybody. One quick thing. I don't know what happened with the video and audio there. My apologies. So I'm doing this off my phone now. So
I just kept talking.
We're good. Yeah, I know. Yeah, and which you could do for an hour, so that would be fine as well. Yeah.
I was like, what happened? Oh, wait. Anyway, here's the next story. So, but yeah, that's when it really started for me. The advocacy piece was, and people really often want to do advocacy, and one of the things they're afraid of is, what if I get backlash? What if people believe my intrusive thoughts? I'm here to tell you that it was the opposite. And in fact, it was healing. It was powerful. It is incredible to meet people that share the same affliction that you do with OCD. And that's where I just slowly have built this business. I went into speaking, and then I did a podcast for a while called the Stigma Mental Illness Radio. It was so fun. And then started doing different speeches, and then I trained as a peer support specialist here in Denver, was certified, worked in the state institutions for a couple years. So I have a breadth of knowledge, like a depth of knowledge on like how to work and do peer support, not only with OCD, but many different diagnoses. And and that kind of evolved into doing peer work on my own, working with people around the world one-on-one. I co-founded a Peer Recovery Services. It's a government contract where we put peers in the state institutions. And then we just started OCD Peers, which is a group-based practice to help provide support at a more affordable rate.
I'm trying to figure out the best way to do this and still see you and hey, look at that. That actually works. We're going to have a new program next week, everyone, and not use this one anymore, because this is the second time it's done this now. But I think this works. You can hear me. That's what counts. I can hear you. That's okay.
Yeah. I think we have like a Patrick McGrath in the middle that's just a black screen, but we're okay.
Yes. Well, I decided I didn't like myself, so I just decided to. This is my altar. This is Jim, by the way. This is not Patrick McGrath. This is Jim. So yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of how and I'm also the author of Pure OCD, The Invisible Side of Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder. And this is kind of how everything started. I wrote this book to put my story out there. It was terrifying, but just the impact it's had on being able to meet people that suffer around the world, to help them feel less alone, and also to help me feel less alone selfishly. It's just been phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you so much for the work that you've done, and Gamechangers, and the work you're trying to do there as well. And
so I forgot about
it. Yeah, you want to talk a moment about Gamechangers too?
Yeah. Yes. So I also started a nonprofit. I I started a nonprofit a few years ago. I never wanted to start a nonprofit, just so you know. But what I felt like was, as an advocate, advocacy is really hard. It can be really lonely. You're doing a lot of work on top of the work you're already doing. So you're basically giving a lot of labor away for free. And that's fine too. I don't mind doing that. But at the same time, when you're not getting support and you're feeling like you're working a lot, you're fielding comments and questions from people, that can be hard. And I know that my other advocate friends were feeling the same way. And so I invited like 8 people out to Denver, and I was like, I'm going to pay for an Airbnb. We'll all sit and mastermind. Then we'll do this. We'll do an event, kind of offset the cost of an Airbnb, and we'll break even and it'll be fine. And it was magical. And then the next year I did one, and I invited Patrick McGrath and several
I've heard of him.
people.
Yeah, I've heard of him. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was a little bit bigger and a little bit longer of an event. And then last year it was a full day event. And then we made it into a nonprofit. And we are rolling out some initiatives this fall to really start working on some of our big barriers in our community: financial barriers to treatment, cultural barriers to treatment. How can we educate therapists on how to treat OCD? This is literally rolling out for me next week. So this is really good timing. We had a brainstorm session in Austin at the IOCDF conference. So all of those initiatives that we came up then, I'm now putting in these initiatives moving forward, getting therapist input. The answers to our biggest questions in our community are in our community. And that's where OCD Gamechangers is going to come in.
All right. Well, hey, there's already like 8.5 million replies to the chat, just so you know. So that part's been good already. So I figured I'm gonna just pull some out here, and we'll see what we got, and then we'll give a chat. And as we always like to say on here, this is not therapeutic advice to everybody on a webinar. This is opinions, and if you're looking for actual therapy, check out NOCD. Is a great option for therapy available to you through teletherapy. And you can book a free 15-minute call with us at that little thing up in the corner in the yellow box. So, all right, let's start here. My thoughts don't come with physical anxiety, but when I do experience that physical stress, it's strange. Like, why am I randomly getting anxiety? The absence of it makes me confused when I experience physical anxiety. So I think that, OCD doesn't come the same way all the time, right? I mean, we can't just say that it follows a plan. It likes to shake things up and screw you up a little bit as much as it possibly can. So if today there's not a lot of physical anxiety, or this week there's not, but then next week for a day there is, I think ultimately that randomness is even more scary to people. And it's another way that OCD gets you even to believe it more and more than what you normally would. Mm-hmm. Just my take on that. Let's see. How can you cope with intrusive thoughts that seem to linger even when you significantly reduce your compulsions? What do you think, Chrissy?
So one of the ways that I look at this is a great question, because I think that people that have OCD, including myself, can sometimes get into the mindset of ERP is going to get rid of the bad and then life is going to be good, which is again like black and white thinking. And so one of the things that I do that helps me, just so you know, I do peer support, but I can't give therapeutic advice, but I can just use my lived experience, is I try to, let's say something is bugging me, like I have a trigger. And if I have a trigger that's really bad and it's staying with me for a few days, then I ultimately decide it's time to do some ERP around this. So I strategize. I'm going to do ERP for 7 days about this, blah, blah, blah. And usually I can gain a lot of traction. That doesn't mean that the thoughts are going to go away. And I have to keep in check that doing ERP doesn't mean the thoughts doesn't mean it's going to cancel out the thoughts. However, when the thoughts reappear for me, what I do is I say, okay, what's the circumstance surrounding this? Is this a certain time of the day? Is it time of the month? Is it, you know, am I hungry? Am I, you know, is this just a naturally occurring thing? And what I do is take whatever the thought is and apply it to my next ERP. So that way it's this continual cycle of, okay, it showed up for me again. And so then tomorrow at 9 a.m. when I'm doing ERP, because it showed up at 2 p.m., I'm going to throw it right in there. So what I feel like I'm accomplishing at that point is this continual cycle of, okay, whatever thoughts are showing up for me at whatever point during the day, I'm just going to continue to expose myself to. And that usually does work for me. I will tell you, I had sexual orientation OCD when I was a teenager. When I experience it now, it feels the same as it did when I was 15 years old. And so one of the things I really remember is memorizing what it feels like, what my behaviors are around it, and going, well, you know, maybe even if it's 25 years later, it must be true this time. Let me throw it into some ERP tomorrow, and we'll just knock it out then. Like not putting emphasis on the thoughts more, but recognizing the behaviors and continuing to expose myself to it.
Yeah. I think interesting from a therapist, and I love the lived experience piece for the two of us to talk about it, is there a way, I get asked this all the time, to not have a thought, right? And so far, we haven't figured that out yet, right? No therapist has yet figured that out. I mean, there are movies like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind where they come into your home at night and they rip thoughts out of your brain through little, you know, zapping of electrodes and things of that nature. But those are the things of movies. And so, and I think sometimes too, this is where maybe you'll get some of the suicidal thoughts that can happen with OCD. Can I live the rest of my life with this thought or this image or this urge? And what was it like to kind of surrender to the notion that this thing will be with me forever?
It came with a lot of grief.
Yeah.
And for me, Patrick, it took a long time to accept that. So acceptance was hard. I just firm feet planted in denial. No way. This might happen for other people, but it's not going to happen for me. And I'm stronger than this, and I am smarter than this. And I championed that path for as long as I could until almost I had to surrender and realize that the fear of it being part of my life forever is no different than the fear of me not knowing my sexual orientation or whether I'm a pedophile or whether I'm a murderer. It was the same thing. And I think it's this, sometimes we get into this straight line, you know, narrow path of like, I just need to knock out these obsessions, when the nuance of living with OCD and the complexities are so broad, and grief is a big part of that. And grief and acceptance, I think, go hand in hand of walking down that path of, you know what, I might have this forever, but I also might also not know my sexual orientation forever. And I've dealt with that. And it wasn't as hard as I thought it was. So why don't I treat this the same way? And for me, that's worked. But also allowing myself to feel sad and to grieve the loss in my life of what my life could have been, what it is now because of OCD, whether I'm damaged goods, all the memories I lost, all of these things. I had to push through those and really grieve them in order to get to a place where I could accept it and move forward and go, okay, but there's still life to live.
Yeah. And even a question came up here, you know, let's say on even the NOCD app where we have the community, and how to for there, but even in general, when you're working in peer support or myself as a therapist, how do we support people who are contemplating that concept of, do I want to live with OCD, right? And I'll say, at least from my point of view, I try to get across the idea that we aren't our thoughts or our images or our urges, even though there's a disorder out there that tells us that we are, right? And because if we were our thoughts or our images or urges, it's a really fascinating disorder that only works for negative. I mean, I can't think something positive and have it happen in OCD, right? And I can't have an urge to do something good and it happen in OCD. And I don't have images in OCD that are wonderful that then suddenly manifest. You know, no one's ever walked in my office and said, I'm afraid everyone loves me and thinks I'm awesome. I've never treated that either. It's a disorder that only convinces you that there could be something bad that you could be responsible for. And just maybe if you do these ridiculous things, you could remove the ability of that thing to happen, or the responsibility of your part for happening. And as you had said earlier, which I really appreciate your honesty on, and if you don't, hey, here's another way out, right?
Yeah. And I've obviously been there, and I'm just going to be honest with you. I still get there. I still battle suicidal thoughts. I still battle suicidal ideation. What I want to say, and I actually talked about this yesterday in the Mental Health on the Mighty video, is I now look at it, though, different in part of my pattern. When I feel suicidal, that's an indication and a red flag of like, hey, there's something else going on. If I didn't have OCD, I wouldn't be suicidal. I know that for a fact.
Right.
And so when I feel that way, I use it as okay, then what can I do? It doesn't scare me anymore the way that it used to, because when you feel that way, then we get all the shame and guilt, and I could never do that to my family. I could never do that to, what kind of person thinks this way? Well, you know what? The kind of person that thinks that way is a person with OCD.
Shocker. Yeah, there we go.
Every damn day of your life by your own brain. Like, who doesn't want some relief from that? And sometimes just wants it to stop. One of the things that one of the biggest healing elements of living with OCD is talking to other people. The suicide piece of this is really great because this is Suicide Prevention Month, but the suicide piece of this is a high percentage of loneliness and isolation, and I'm the only one, and what kind of person has these thoughts, and I can't take it anymore, and this and this, and so the connection that you can feel with someone that can just say, I get it, which is why that's why we started OCD Peers. That's why I do peer support. That's why I feel like peer support is so beneficial. I don't provide therapy, but I provide a space for someone with zero judgment and the ability to say, man, I've been there. It's healing. It's healing.
Yeah. You know, Carl, our advocate, I like what he said a couple of weeks ago on here. He said, this is either one of the world's largest gatherings of murderers, pedophiles, and awful, horrible people, or it's just a group of people with OCD who got together on a webinar. It's one or the other, you know. So
I mean, I'll take it either way. I love people in this community, whether it's true or not.
Yeah, right, exactly. And there's a lot of comments about how the mind is very powerful. Yes, because we can scare the heck out of ourselves, right? We are amazingly good at scaring the heck out of ourselves. All right, let's throw a couple of other things out there. Let's take a look. someone called OCDs Dr. Negative. Yes, that's a very good thing.
At least they're not calling you Dr. Negative.
Well, no, I hope not. I hope no one calls me. I've had a few patients who had a few choice names for
I
me.
think I've
Probably.
called you Dr. Negative a few times.
If a thought lingers with anxiety, is that part of rumination or just a thought? Sometimes it lingers for 30 minutes, even if I try to disregard it and say that this is ERP exposed. Sometimes the typing doesn't always come through well. I have found this, Chrissy. I'm interested in your thought too. Again, lived experience is always appreciated. The more a thought lingers, to me, is typically a remnant of the more I'm trying to make it go away. Or hoping it will go away. Even if I'm not actively trying to make it go away, the act of just hoping it will go away or checking now and then to see if it's still around keeps it around. Yeah,
the more it lingers, I can correlate that also to the more I'm trying to prove whether it's real or not. I mean, if it's still there, I still need an answer.
Yeah. And
right?
This might be interesting for you too, Chrissy. So I went to a spiritual therapist instead of a cognitive behavioral or ERP therapist for OCD, and it triggered new obsessions in me instead of helping. Can traditional talk therapy make OCD worse?
Oh, yes. That is a giant yes.
It's a giant yes.
Oh, this is a topic for another day. The religion and OCD. And more so not anti-religion, but just being very careful with your boundaries around religion. Religion can be an amazing coping skill, but you have to have the right people around you, and you have to have the right expectations of what that religion is going to help you with in coping with OCD, especially if you have scrupulosity involved. I was saturated in the religious culture when I was diagnosed and dealing with everything. And, my family is really religious. I will say I was really lucky to have a family that got it, some of them, but there was still very much this, well, you just need to pray more. And
worst advice ever to someone with scrupulosity. Right.
Well, yeah, that was, I was like, how much more can I do? To memorize the whole Bible. Like, what else can I do? And so it's really just important in understanding the value of religion and what it can bring to your recovery, which is, think of it like a supportive friend. Religion can be like in your support system, have
it doesn't have to be, but it can be.
I mean, if you want it in your recovery journey, like, have it walk alongside you, but don't have it lead you.
Right. Yeah, that's good. And even then, we've had to correct people on here in the past who wanted to put in the feed, well, if you're having scrupulosity, just read this Bible verse, and then everything. And it's like, no, that's, in fact, that Bible verse has probably been read thousands of times already. Telling someone to read it one more time is not the thing that's going to be helpful in this kind of situation, right? But I want to go back to the second part, really. Can traditional talk therapy make OCD worse? And yes, and the reason why is many traditional talk therapists are risk aversive, and they don't like ever seeing a patient in their office uncomfortable. So their entire goal is to try to make you as comfortable as possible in the 45 minutes to an hour that you're seeing them. Versus if you're a session with me, I hope it's the most uncomfortable hour that you've had all week long, because then we've done really good ERP. So I'm quite the opposite of that. Yeah.
My goal is to make you feel like shit.
Yeah, well, pretty much. Yeah. If you leave going, Dr. McGrath, I just feel so great today, I'm going to be like, wow, I really sucked that session bad. I mean, that was, Wait, I got an idea. Hold on, Yeah, exactly.
From the lived experience piece too, I also want to say that wasting time on talk therapy also reduces hope. And hope is really important. And hope is important, and motivation is important when you're doing the right behavioral therapy. And sometimes there's two things. Number one, like the last thing that you want to do is spend a lot of time and money in talk therapy, just because your insurance covers it, or just because you think that this is the right thing to do, or just because you feel bad and don't want to fire your therapist because they're so nice. I don't care.
They're
if they're
so
not.
nice.
No,
yeah.
Bye. Go back and
see
them after behavioral therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying you have to sever a total relationship with them, but they're not going to provide the therapy that you need. That's one thing that really drew me to NOCD, that I was excited that we could bring evidence-based treatment to the masses, right? And to people in rural communities, and people who didn't have access to a specialist, and people who couldn't afford a specialist because now we're working on insurance and everything. So I was so excited about the mission and the work that's, from what Stephen went through and his own OCD to where we're at now with NOCD, to be able to provide that to people across the country. So I think that's very exciting that we get to do that. So,
don't waste time on talk therapy.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Here's a good lived experience. How do you focus on your own recovery as opposed to comparing yourself to how fast others are recovering? I've been struggling for years, and I'm only in about my 3rd week of treatment, and I feel anxious because I feel like I'm still in the same place when I started.
Comparative OCD is a horrible thing to do, and I know, like, we can't help it. This is where Google goes wrong. We want to know everything about treatment. We want to know everything about everybody's recovery, and but what happens is then all of a sudden we're branding that in our brains of what it should be. Here's what I would say to you when you're going into treatment: take all your shoulds and throw them out. ERP, you want it to be an authentic experience on your own, because your ERP is going to look very different than mine. You're going to do different things. Things are going to work for you that didn't work for me, and vice versa. Recovery also, I want to mention, recovery continues after ERP is over. You're learning these tools that you will take with you for the rest of your life. Even if you continue or you go through ERP again in a few years, I always say to people, once you learn the mind-body connection of ERP, it's like riding a bike. You'll never forget how to do it. But sometimes you gotta, after a few years, you pick the bike up and you dust it off, and then you ride and you fall over. And then, but the more you practice, the better you get. That is recovery. The more you practice, the more you make this a lifestyle change. So think about ERP is like your boot camp. I'm all in. I am sign me up. I'm going to go all for it. And then from there, you're practicing daily, even after it's over, and you get better and better at it.
Yeah. That's great. Reminder, once again, everyone, welcome to the NOCD podcast. We do this every Wednesday night. Our 3rd Wednesday of the month is always our diversity-focused podcast as well, too. So that'll be coming up on, I believe, the 16th of this month. And we're excited. We'll have a topic next week. We'll tell you what we're going to talk about. If you're interested in NOCD, go to the Google Play or iOS and download the NOCD app. This is an interesting one, Chrissy. I have trauma-related OCD and can't touch anything that my abuser touched, but was asked during a CBT session to organize and clean those things. How do I, and of course, now someone else put a chat in and it bumped it. So, but basically along the lines of, there's this concept of emotional contamination, not just physical, like germy contamination, but the essence of someone is on there, and either I don't want to touch it because I don't want to be reminded of something, or I don't want to touch it because I don't want to feel like they're with me again, or I don't want to touch it because I don't want to take on their characteristics or something. So I think that's sometimes a forgotten bit of OCD, that especially in the world of COVID, we talk so much about germ contamination, but we don't talk about maybe emotional contamination, right? And the fear of taking on bad juju or something like that. Is one way to think about it. But have you seen that with some of the people you've supported in peer work and everything too?
Absolutely. One of the things I try to tell people is that don't rule out that you have behavioral compulsions, but your feelings are also just as invested. Your emotions are invested. To me, like, let's say if I'm having something that I feel, I haven't really had emotional contamination, so I really can't talk about that. But what I can say is that I have had emotional connections to things that I'm triggered for, and I have to treat it the same way that I would treat anything else. Even if I have to do ERP with my emotions first, meaning sometimes I will even do imaginal exposures about, okay, I'm going to flood myself with shame, guilt, fear, and disgust. Let's go. Let's flood myself with it. Let's do this now. Even if I have to do that before I get to the actual exposure, it's really important to recognize that OCD isn't just about, like, I have this behavior, I'm ruminating X, Y, and Z. It's also going to pull you in any way it possibly can. So use those patterns to your advantage, throw them in your ERP, and do what works no matter what, because the outcome will be the same.
Yeah, that's great. Crusher points out, Crusher has some fun.
OCD Crusher.
You know Crusher too? Yeah.
Yeah.
What we resist persists, which I like that idea. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I said something to a patient now. Once in a while, as a therapist, and I have my little write these things down things once in a while. Don't try harder, try different. Came out in the middle of a session one time, and I've used that ever since. I said to someone the other day, I hate the thing I love, and I love the thing I hate. And that's almost like what the relationship is with OCD, right? Like, if you look at me, it looks like I love OCD because I do everything that it wants me to do, but I hate it.
Yes.
So I don't know. It was just kind of it popped out of my mouth kind of thing the other day. I hate the thing I love, and I love the thing I hate. So.
Oh, that kind of makes me sad, but okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I need to think on it.
I don't like to make you sad. You can think on it. You can also. We were going to share a story. So I was driving in a car once with our friend Chrissy, who wanted us to pull over because she thought the person in the front seat had thrown up earlier in the evening. And now that, of course, air automatically flows backwards, no matter what.
I mean, it automatically. He told us.
He did tell us. He had not actually thrown up. Yeah. So Chrissy thought that she was in the back seat sitting next to me, breathing in vomit germs, and that she then was going to throw up. And on this no lights anywhere, windy road in the middle of the mountains made us stop the car so she could get out. Because she went into a panic attack. Because she was breathing in.
I didn't want to tell Dr. McGrath that I was having a panic attack because I knew that he would do exposures in the
But I knew, and I was having a blast trying to put more air toward Chrissy in the back seat and everything. And now, but here's the best part of it. We come to discover the next morning, though the person said they had thrown out, they'd actually had diarrhea and not actually even thrown up. So she wasn't even breathing in vomit germs, but was so convinced that she was breathing in vomit germs that maybe you were breathing in diarrhea germs. Maybe that's actually what the panic attack was. But here's the thing. Yeah, and you don't care about diarrhea. But you had so worked yourself up over something that wasn't even true that it brought a panic attack on.
And I tortured my husband.
Oh, I know, because he was driving. Sean, you have to pull over. We're not pulling over. You have to. Could someone roll the windows down? Could we please?
I need air. I need everybody.
And then you insisted on sitting in the front seat so you would be in front of the vomit germs and not behind them, so that way the vomit germs would keep flowing into the back of the car and not toward the front of the car.
It is one of the best stories ever. And then we found out, like, he really didn't vomit. And it was an OCD therapist, by the way. And he said,
I'm not
wanted to
naming
tell
names.
you, but I wanted you to sit in the uncertainty.
Yeah,
I will
it was
never
pretty
forgive
awesome.
him for it.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. But it's a great story for everyone out there. Yes, yes. Whew, the vapors, Chrissy, the
I feel
vapors.
like
Yeah.
I'm gonna vomit.
It's such a great story, though, for everyone out there to show that here's something that wasn't even true, that you had absolutely 100% convinced yourself was true, and it brought on a panic experience for you.
I worried for 12 hours about it, only to find out it wasn't real.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I'm not going to tell you that if it happened tonight, I still wouldn't worry.
You would still probably worry about it. Right. Exactly. So, but what a wonderful example of how we can convince ourselves of the truthfulness of nothing.
Oh,
right?
I know, but it feels so real, Patrick.
Yeah,
It
and
feels
here's
so real. That's the hard part about it.
here's the challenge in therapy, right? And this is the basic cognitive distortion of emotional reasoning. It feels so real, therefore it must be true.
And I think that's what's so hard about having OCD is, and the grief process too, is really understanding that, you know, and coming to the conclusion of, I can't trust my feelings. I can't trust what things feel like. And that's grief worthy. And that's hard. That is hard to accept. And and I think that, you know, for me, going in and out of different things for so long, you know, really believing, basically I look at it as getting yanked around on the OCD leash until I finally was like, okay, they may feel different and they feel real, but my behaviors are still the same. And I've got to start focusing in on my behaviors instead of following my feelings every time. And that was a harsh reality. That was hard to accept.
I like what you said with the leash. You know, another one of those little gems that popped out of my mouth a couple of weeks ago was, you can only be strung along if you're holding on to the rope. Right? And people with OCD hold on to that rope like there is no tomorrow. Like, I mean, and it does get into, I think, an interesting thing. And we've talked about it a little bit on the webinar, but I always love getting any new guest on here to kind of give me your opinion on it. People don't want OCD, and people also are afraid to live life without OCD because they don't know what life will be like without the influence of OCD in their life.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think that my opinion on this, and I'm speaking a lot for people who, you know, my own lived experience, I had it for 12 years. And I often relate it to someone who is in an abusive relationship and they don't even know it, especially when they were younger. And then someone takes them out of this household and puts them somewhere that they're safe. And they're like, okay, go live life. You're safe now.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're going to not believe them. You're going to cling to the behaviors that are keeping you safe. You're going to, you know, make sure to be in protection mode all the time, and being able to learn to live in an environment where you have never felt safe, but then now all of a sudden are allowed to believe that you're safe. That takes practice, and it takes years, and sometimes you never get there.
One of my patients described OCD as Stockholm syndrome.
Yes. Yes, I've heard that before.
I thought that was really cool, that idea that I'll do anything for my captor to make my captor happy with me, right? And
and I also think that it's a lot of times people will talk about well, if I get better, you know, I don't know who I am then without OCD. I'm behind in life. Not that people use OCD as an excuse. I don't think, you know, many people in our community do not. But
Right.
but to not have it, then all of a sudden you have to face all the things that you missed. You have to
Sure.
face the grief. This is,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, the bottom line is it's hard to resist.
Yeah.
It's hard to resist.
Well, and it's hard to resist. And going back to I appreciate your discussion of it's the grief that one has when you learn that you can't always trust every feeling that you have, right? And I think it goes to something that you've discussed a lot on your YouTube videos that I've seen is that idea of the groinal response, which is so difficult for people in the OCD community who think that they shouldn't be feeling something down there at certain points in times. It's the Seinfeld episode when George Costanza gets the massage from a male masseuse, and he's like, Jerry, it moved, Jerry. and they're all freaking out, right? So, even not only can't we trust in OCD maybe the idea of what I'm feeling emotionally, I doubt my physical reactions and why I'm even having them. And of course, if there's the most negative spin that I could put on it, I'm going to put it on it because that's the one that OCD is going to believe more than any of the other ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really passionate about the physical responses. Not only because of my lived experience, when the Groinal showed up for me, that was it. That was really when it solidified of like, this must be real now. There's no way it could manifest physically and not be real. And to this day, I still struggle with that. If I have, if it's attached to an injury or if it's, I just went through a whole phase of, thinking like, I don't even want to get into it, but my jaw was hurt. And I was like, oh my God, looking up all these diseases I must have. But to me, it was especially when it's something as personal as arousal. For males, they can feel it in their crotch and their back end. For women, they can feel it in their breast. They can feel it in their groin. And then the other issue, Patrick, is that because we're placing emphasis on it, it feels 10 times stronger than actual arousal. So then you start comparing, well, I'm about to have sex with my husband, and why am I not getting it the way I got it when I looked at that chick earlier today? You know what I mean? Like, what does that mean? And it's so, and then the idea, like, I'm actually running a group next week called OCD and Sex and Libido, because this is not talked about enough. It's not, people aren't allowed to disclose it enough because of shame and guilt. And this is one of the sticking points for people to really believe this cannot be OCD. If, my penis is aroused or if I'm feeling wet down there, like, I'm just going to be graphic, but like, that is the reality that no one says. And people get scared that because it's not talked about enough, they must be alone.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I hope things like the peer support community and the NOCD community and better access to care really does help to address that feeling of being alone that for, well, any point in time up until now, people would have felt, because they just, if there's, obviously technology has its pros and cons, right? But one of the pros is definitely this ability to link together and to discover that you are not the only person, right?
There's really something to be said when I have a sexual intrusive thought and I feel a sexual feeling in my body and I'm terrified. There really is something to be said. I was in a group at OCD Peers last week, and 5 people said that they have the same thing. In that moment, I can go, okay, I'm not alone. Even though it may feel really real, I'm not alone and I'm okay. It just normalizes it for you. My fear is how many people are out there right now, Patrick, experiencing this stuff, and they can't.
1 in 40. That's how many. 1 in 40.
I bet it's more. But they can't type into the computer because they're scared. They can't, say to themselves, or they can't justify how to look for help, because when they look at a child, their groin moves. Like this is the shit that haunts me. Like we gotta find them, we gotta reach them, we gotta let them know. Like lives get lost because of this.
Yeah. So I've sometimes OCD therapists will joke, when a therapist dies, the goal is to make sure that your files are transferred to someone else who will keep them for you for a certain amount of years. And now the joke among therapists is also, and be sure to erase my Google search history as well, because of all the things that we look up, right, and everything. Yeah. Before we go, though, I just want to take
over.
Yeah, it's almost over. It is. But before we go, I do want to take a moment and just do a shout out to any of our adolescents or therapists listening who know or knew Don Vardell from Mountain Valley. And for those of you who don't, Don went out kayaking in the ocean on Sunday. His kayak was found Sunday evening, and unfortunately his body was found yesterday by some fishermen about 12 miles away. So I just wanted to just put it out there. If any of you weren't aware, that if you know anyone from Mountain Valley or anything, then maybe reach out to them and check in on them. But our hearts definitely go out to the Mountain Valley family. And it's just a sad loss. Don was a really great guy. When I opened up the Foglia Family Foundation Residential Treatment Center for Amita, Don invited me out and let me hang out for a day at Mountain Valley and just quiz him about things to know and learn from my mistakes and goofs and all those things. And so it was really nice. So Don Vardell, who was the chief executive over there at Mountain Valley, is unfortunately no longer with us, and we'll miss him. And I just wanted to make sure that we did a little shout out. Did you know Don, Chrissy?
I didn't know him, but I knew of him, and I was really sad to hear this.
Yeah, it was a big loss. So, but we will move on as we do, and we will do good things in memory of Don to be sure that his work is not for loss. So Chrissie Hodges, it's been a blast chatting with you for this last hour. Sorry, I lost connection there for a few. We will have an entirely new platform next week, everyone. Since this is now 2 weeks in a row where this has happened. Yeah. But
my biggest fear was that I was gone and I was just talking to myself.
No. You were on. And boy, I'll tell you, if anybody could hold a conversation with themselves for a long time while I figure things out, it's Chrissie Hodges, let me tell you right there. So it was about the most wonderful guest to have tonight, who could just yammer away for, even if it was an hour, would have just kept talking, and it would have been great.
I was just about to give a tour around my house.
Exactly. So,
so
thank you, Chrissy.
If it's okay, if you're interested,
please.
My book is Pure OCD, The Invisible Side of Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder. You can find information about my peer support at chrissiehodges.com. Our group support is at ocdpeers.com. And then I have a YouTube channel under my name. I talk all things OCD, down to the nitty gritty. So, definitely if you want to join the community and, really experience some normalization of what you're going through, please reach out and come and join some of our groups, because you deserve community. You deserve to know that you're not alone. And that's what gets us through. That's what helps through the healing and the grieving process. And NOCD, thank you so much for all that you do. I'm so glad to be part of this community. And, Patrick, love you so much. And I'm just so glad that we know each other and have had lots of laughs. And I know we'll have a lot more together. And thank you for having me on, as always.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Once again, the NOCD platform is downloadable at iOS or Google Play. Please feel free to do so. Reach out to us for a free 15-minute consultation for teletherapy via NOCD. This will be available soon on our YouTube channel to watch again if anybody wants. And have a great evening, everyone. Good night, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Chrissy.